Hey, what is going on, everybody? It is Rob, aka The Diligent Dev, and welcome to part 2 of our Tinder style movie night picker. In this part, we're going to be implementing authentication with Firebase Authentication. We'll be adding a sign up and sign in page. We'll also be adding a users module to our Vuex store and setting up some route guards to protect the authenticated pages inside of our application. So let's go ahead and jump over to the computer and get right into it. Okay, so here we are over at the computer and I have Visual Studio Code open with our movie night picker project loaded up. Now in the previous video, we went ahead and set up everything that we're going to need for development, and that included our Firebase project, the Vue project, and adding Firebase to the Vue project, which included setting up Firebase authentication within the Firebase console. So if you haven't checked out that video, go ahead and watch that now before continuing. And let's go ahead and get right into coding our sign up and sign in pages. And the first thing we'll do is head over to src, views, and we'll go ahead and create our sign up page. So we'll add a new file. We'll call it signup.vue. And then in here, we will put our template tag. We'll just put an H1 in here for now. And we'll also add our script tag. And then we'll head over to router, index, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and copy this about path, and we're going to paste it in right above it. And we will call this one sign up for the path, and then sign up for name. And then we'll go ahead and import our sign up page. We'll go ahead and save that. And the last thing that we need to do, well, I got to put a comma here and save again. And then the next thing we need to do is head over to app.vue. And inside of this vmain, we're just going to say router view. And we'll go ahead and save everything. And then I'm going to open up a new terminal. I'm going to run npm run serve. And this will launch a development server so that we can see what we're coding as we're coding it. So now that our development server is loaded up, I'm going to command click on this URL. I'm going to drag this over here. We see that our home page is displaying right now, but if I go to sign up, we see that our sign up page is now displayed. So what I'm going to do is pin this to this side of the screen and pin this over here. And we'll probably make this a little bit smaller so that we can see our code better. And now we'll head back to our sign up page. And now we can start coding out our sign up page. So what we're going to do is go to the export default and we're going to make a data property. And inside of this, we're going to hold the data inside of our sign up form. So we'll say name and we'll set that to a blank string. We're also going to need an email and we'll set that to a blank string, and we'll need a password and also set that to a blank string. Now for validation, we're going to need an error message in case Firebase authentication returns something. So we'll set an error message property and set that to a blank string as well. Then we're going to need a form, and this is going to reference our form and make sure that all of our validations are correct. And we're going to set that to false at first. And then we're going to set an isLoading property, because when we call our method to sign in, and we're going to set that to false. Because when we call our method to sign in, we want to display a loader on the page. Next, I'm going to make some validation rules. So I'm going to say rules and set that to an object. The first one is going to be the validation on the email. And we're just going to say v. So first we're going to check that it's not null or a blank string. And then we're going to say match. And we're going to want it to match a regex, and just make sure that we have an @ symbol in there for a valid email. And if we don't, then we're just going to say, please enter a valid email. Next, we're going to set a length validation, and this will be for our password. And we're going to say len, set that to an arrow function, v, set that also to an arrow function. And first we're going to make sure that our value actually exists. And then we're going to say dot length is greater than or equal to the length property that we pass in. And if it's not, we'll do a backtick here because we're going to do some text interpolation. I'm going to go ahead and close this down so we can see this better. And we're going to say invalid character length, comma, requires, and then we'll go ahead and pass it our length that we pass in. Next, we're going to do a password validation. So we're going to say password, we'll pass in a value, and we're going to check if it exists first. And then we're going to say match. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste in a regular expression, and I will put this in the video description. And you can also find a BitBucket repo attached to this. But this is checking for an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a numeric character, and a special character. So if it doesn't find that, then we're going to return password must contain uppercase, lowercase, number, and special character. And the last one we're going to do is a required. So we'll say required. We will pass it a value. And if they don't pass it in, then we'll just return this field is required. And then below our data property, we'll add a methods property. And for now, we'll just make a placeholder here, and we will say sign up with username and password. And now that we have everything for the template, let's go ahead and build out our template. So I'm going to remove this H1, and I'm going to say vcard. I'm going to give it a class of mx auto. We're going to give it a style of max width 500 pixels, and the mx auto will center it, and the max width will make sure that it's not wider than 500 pixels. Inside of the car, we'll do a v overlay. We'll pass in a value property and set that to is loading. Inside of our overlay, we will do a v progress circular. We'll set the color to primary. We'll also set a property of indeterminate and size equal to 64. I'll hit Alt-Shift-F to format this. And underneath our overlay, we will start our vForm. We will give it a ref equal to form, a vModel of form, a class of PA-4 to give it some padding and also some margin. Inside of our form, we will do a vText field. We will give it a vModel of name. We will pass it an array of rules and pass in rules.required. We will make it a filled text field. We'll give it a label equal to name, and then we'll hit Alt-Shift-F to format that. What I'm going to do is go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to paste it below. We will change the vModel to email. We will change the rules to email, and also change the label to email, and we'll pass it a type of email. And then we'll do one more text field, so I'll go ahead and paste that in again. We'll change the vModel to password. We will pass in rules.password, and we're going to pass in rules.length, and we will pass 6 for the length. We'll make it filled. We'll also pass in a counter and set that to 6. We'll give it a label of password, and we'll also give it a type of password. And since we're passing it a counter, we will say style, min height, 96 pixels. And then below our form, we'll do a v-alert, and we will use this to display an error message if we get one from Firebase. So we'll say v-if error message. We'll give it a border of top, a color of red, and we'll give it a class, and we'll set that to ML-5 and MR-5 to give it some margin on the left and right. Now inside of this V alert, we're going to display our error message. And then below that, we're going to do a V divider. And since we're using a card, we can do V card actions. And this is where our buttons will be displayed. So we'll do a V button. We'll give it a type of text, and on click, all we're gonna do is reset the form. So we'll say refs.form.reset. Next, we'll put a spacer in between our buttons. So I'm just gonna say V spacer. We'll do another V button. And then we'll set the disabled property. And what we're gonna do is say if the form is equal to false, and this means that if all of our validations have been met, we're gonna go ahead and just disable this button. We'll say color equals primary, loading equals is loading. We'll make it depressed, and on click, we're just gonna go ahead and call our sign up with email and password. And then we need to give our button some text. So we'll say sign up. And it looks like I missed the text on this button, and we'll just say clear. So I'm gonna hit Alt-Shift-F. We're going to save all of that. And now we see that we have our sign up form. And then just to sanity check our code, I like to open up the console to see if we get any errors. And it looks like we are getting some errors. And it says property or method sign up with email and password is not defined. So let's go ahead and look at our code. Oh, and I said sign up with username and password. So let's just go ahead and copy this. We will go down here and paste that in. I'm going to save, I'm going to reload and inspect. And if I drag this over here, we see that we are not getting any errors. So our form as of now is good to go.
And the next thing we need to do is create a method for user signup so that we can add them to Firebase Authentication. But before we do that, we're gonna add a user module to our Vuex store. And that way we always have access to our user information in our store. So to do that, we're gonna head back to our project. We're going to go to store. We're gonna create a new folder in here called modules. And then we're going to create a file inside of this folder called user.js. Up at the top, we're going to say const namespaced equals true. And what this will do is it will namespace this file so that when we're dispatching actions from the store, it won't cause any naming conflicts with other modules that we have. Next, we're going to do const states equals, and our state is going to consist of an ID that we'll set to null. We'll set the name to null, and we'll also set the email to null. Then we're going to do const mutations, set that to an object, and we're going to put one mutation in here for now. We're gonna say set underscore user underscore data states and payload. And we'll set that to an arrow function. And what we're going to have in here, we're going to say states.id equals payload.id, state.name equals payload.name, and states.email equals payload.email. Next, we're going to define our action for that mutation. So we're going to say const actions equals an object, and we'll set an action of set user data. We pass it the context and user data that we'll pass into it. And then we'll just say context dot commit sets user data, which is pointing at this right here, and then the user data that we'll be passing into it. Next, it's good practice, or at least I like to say const getters. And we'll just set that to an empty object since we don't have any getters to define right now. And then we will export default, namespace, states, mutations, actions, and getters. I'm going to hit Alt-Shift-F to format everything. And then we're going to head to the file that creates our store, which is our index.js. Under our store, up here, we're going to import that users module. So we'll say import user from module/user. And then down in modules, we will add that. And then we'll go ahead and save everything. Then we'll head back to our signup file and go to the sign up with email and password. And this is where our logic is going to live. But before we actually do that, we need to head to the top here. And we're going to import Firebase from Firebase. And we're also going to import DB from our main.js file. Head back down to the sign up with email and password. First thing we're going to do is set this .isLoading equal to true. Then we're going to wrap everything in a try catch. And inside of the try block, we're going to say let authRes equal await. So since we're awaiting this, we need to make this async. We will await Firebase. I'm going to close this down. .auth .create user with email and password. And then we're going to pass this .email and this .password. And I'll hit Alt-Shift-F to format this so we get a better look at it. So we're going to await the result of this. And if that goes through successfully, we're going to insert a record into a new users collection that we'll be creating. So we're going to say await db.collection. We'll call it users. And we're going to set the document ID. So we'll say .doc. We're going to set it to authRes.user.userID. Or I'm sorry, UID. And the reason that we're doing this is I think it's good practice to have a document with the same ID as the user. And the reason that we're creating this users collection is because a lot of times when you have users, you're going to want to add a lot of other different things that you wouldn't be able to contain, or it's not a good practice to contain it in Firebase authentication claims. And that could be a whole nother video over claims, but it's best to just have a separate collection and you can reference it with that ID that we're going to be storing in Vuex. And you can also get it from the Firebase authentication package, but you can grab this document very easily and you can store anything related to the users inside of that collection. But we need to say .set name, set to this .name, and email equal to this .email. Alt-Shift-F to format this. Next, we're going to say this .store.dispatch. And what we're going to do is dispatch that set user data so that we can set our user data inside of our Vuex store. So I'm going to say user/set user data. And then we're going to pass in an object. The ID is going to be authRes.user.uid. Email is going to be this .email. And actually we'll put name above email. Name will be this .name. So we're passing all that information into our Vuex store so that we'll have it globally across our application that we can tap into without having to make an extra call to Firebase to get that information. And the last thing we'll do is we'll say this.router.replace, and we're going to replace it with a route with the name of home. And then if we do have an error, we're going to say this.error message equals an unexpected error has occurred And then we'll check to see if we have an error message returned. So we'll say error.message. And this would be coming from Firebase because most likely it would fail on one of these Firebase calls. So if we do actually have a message, let's go ahead and overwrite this error message that we specified up here. So we'll just say this.error message equals error.message. And then the last thing we want to do is just stop the loading process. So we'll say this.isLoading equals false. I'll Alt-Shift-F to format everything. And now we should be able to create a user. So I'm going to shut this down. I'll shut this down as well, as it's just my password manager. And before we actually submit to create a user, let's check our validation. So I'm going to hit sign up. And it doesn't look like our validations are firing. This is actually an error message that is returned from Firebase. So if we go ahead and look at our templates, it looks like I accidentally misspelled this. Instead of rule, it should be rules, plural. So we're going to go ahead and head back here. I'm going to save everything. And we'll go ahead and just reload. And this makes more sense because our sign up button is now disabled. So if we put in some information, and we hit sign up now, we see we're redirected to our home page. And let's go over to Firebase. And if we go over here, we see now we have a user with the email that I put in. And if we go over to Firestore, you'll see we have a users collection with the same ID as my user for the document ID and the information that we entered in. So the sign-up form is working correctly. So the next thing we need to do is create our sign-in form. So let's go ahead and get rid of this. We're going to head back to our File Explorer. And inside of Views, we're going to create a new file. And we're going to call it signin.vue. Now our sign-in form is going to be almost identical to our sign-up form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here. I'm going to select all and copy it. And we're going to come back to sign in and we're going to paste it all in. And now we're just going to edit some things. So when people are signing in, we do not need the name anymore. So we're going to go ahead and remove this text field. And let me close this down so we get a better look. We're going to need our email, but instead of rules.email, we're just going to make it rules.required. And the same thing for password, because we don't really want to fire any validations off. We just want to tell them that it's required. So we'll say rules.required. We'll keep our error message. We will keep our clear button. We'll keep our submit button, but we're actually just going to change this to sign in with email and password. And we will change the button text to sign in. And we'll keep going down here. So we don't need our name anymore. So we'll get rid of that. We need email, password. We do need the error message, the form. We'll need is loading. In rules, we'll remove everything except the required because it's the only one that we're using. We will go ahead and change this to sign in with email and password. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and delete everything inside of the try block. Oh, I'm sorry. We'll delete everything inside of the try block. Delete this debugger, and we'll delete everything inside of the try, except for replace home. Okay, so now we're ready to actually work on our sign-in method. So we're going to say const auth_res equals await firebase dot auth dot sign in with email and password. We will pass it this.email, this.password. I'll hit Alt-Shift-F to format that. And then below that, we're going to say const db_user equals await db.collection users.doc
And we will grab that authres.user.uid, since our document is the exact same as the user ID that is set inside of our Firebase authentication. And then we'll just, at the end of this, say .get. So we're signing in, we're awaiting that, and then we're getting our user from our collection. And then below this, we're going to set our user data inside of Vuex. So I'm going to say const user data equals db user dot data. And then we'll say this dot $store dot dispatch user slash set user data. And we need to pass in an object with our user data. So for ID, we're going to say db user dot uid. Name is going to be user data dot name. And email is going to be user data dot email. And it looks like I forgot a comma here. And so this is all set up and ready to go. We're going to go ahead and save this. We're going to head back to our file explorer. We're going to go to our router so that we can register it as a route. So we're going to copy this. I'm going to paste it below. We're going to change the path to sign in, the name to sign in, and then we're going to import the sign in. And one thing I forgot to do was change this Webpack chunk name. So we're going to change this one to sign up and this one to sign in. And that way Webpack knows how to group things when it's doing code splitting. We're going to go ahead and save everything. We're going to head to our sign in page. And we see we have our sign in. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in with the exact same credentials that I had provided earlier. And we see that we're directed to our home page. Let's go back and let's just make sure that our validations are firing correctly. And we see that this is grayed out. And let's just make sure that our validations are firing correctly. So if I go ahead and add this and then try to leave this field, we see that it is required. And the password is also required. And if we enter some stuff in and then we try to sign in, we see that email is badly formatted. If we sign in again, there is no user corresponding to this identified record. So we see that our validations on the form are working correctly, and we're also getting our error messages from Firebase. Now, one thing you might want to do here is capture these errors and display them in a better format. So in the catch block, you could say, if the error message returned from Firebase equals this, you may want to display something like username and email not found. But in the interest of time, we will not be implementing that, and that is something that you can do on your own. But one thing we do need to implement is our authentication route guard, so that way non-authenticated users can't get to parts of the site that we don't want them to be able to get to. Now to do this, up at the top, we're going to import store from store/index. And then we're going to change some routes here. We'll make the home route /home, and we will make our sign in the root path. And that way, when people land on the site, they're automatically directed to the sign in page. Now below our routes, we're going to create a function, and I'm going to call it function guard. We're going to have a to, a from, and a next. And we're going to say that if store.state.user.id, we can go to the next route that they're trying to go to. And if not, we're going to say else next, and just redirect them to our home path, which is our sign-in route. Now up on our home component, we're going to add a property called before enter and set that to guard. So on any routes that we want to lock down, we'll put this guard. And as it tries to go, if we have an ID for our users, it will go to the next. But if we do not have it, then it will go to our sign in page. So I'm going to go ahead and save all of this.
And our sign in route no longer exists. So we're just going to go to the route path and we see we land on our sign in page. And if I enter my credentials, we see that we're not being redirected. So something is happening. So let's go to inspect, and it looks like we're getting some sort of an error that we got in our navigation guard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check our Vue Dev Tools. And if you don't have this, I'd highly recommend that you download it. And if you go to the Vuex tab, it looks like our ID is undefined on our set user data in Vuex. So let's go back to our Vuex store, to user. And that all looks good. So let's go to our sign in page. And if we look at the set user data, I'm accidentally trying to set it to the UID of the DB user, which is coming from our collection. And this should just be ID. So I'm going to go ahead and save this again. And we're going to enter in our credentials. And now we're being redirected to the home page. So that's working as anticipated. And if we look at our Vue Dev Tools, we see that the last mutation for set user data did pass in the correct ID. So we're all ready to go there. And then there's one last thing we need to talk about, which is kind of an authentication gotcha when you use the store. So if we close this down and I go to reload the page, you'll see that we're directed back to our sign in page. And that's because now there's nothing inside of our Vuex store. So let's go ahead and look at our Chrome DevTools and go to the View tab. And if we go to Vuex, it says that there's nothing in here anymore because it's removed when the page is reloaded. And that's not something we want to happen. If the user reloads a page, we want to keep them logged in and not redirect them to the sign-in page. So what we can do to persist our user data in the store is use a plugin called VuexPersist. So what we're going to do is I'm going to close this. We're going to stop our development server. I'm going to open up a terminal and run the following command: npm install vuex-persist. And now that that's installed, we need to head to our vue.config.js, and under our transpile dependencies, we're going to add another one, and it's going to be vuex-persist, and we'll save that. Next, we're going to head to our store. So we're going to go to store index.js. We're going to import vuex-persist from VuexPersist. Then we're going to say const vuex local equals new vuexpersist, and we're going to pass in an object, and we're going to say storage, and we're going to set that to window.local storage. Then down in our store initialization, we're going to say plugins, and we're going to set that to an array and say vuex local .plugin. And we're going to save everything. And we're going to restart our development server. Then I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. We'll enter in our credentials and sign in. And then if we come up here and we refresh, we see that we are not taken back. And then if we go and we open DevTools and we go to application and we go to local storage and we look in here, we see now we have our Vuex store in local storage. And if we go to view and look at the Vuex store, we have our set user data and everything is still in here. So what VuexPersist does is it stores our store in local storage, and then it goes ahead and maps it to our Vuex store on subsequent page reloads so that the user won't be logged out
whenever they reload the page. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this video. In my next video, we're going to be focusing on the core logic of the movie night picker. Particularly, we're going to be focusing on how to link your partner's account to your account. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button and enable notifications so that you'll get notified when that video comes out. If you got any value out of this video, I'd also appreciate it if you hit that like button. And until next time, happy coding.